Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Building at the Edges, a podcast from Seed Club. I'm your host, Jess, or that tall guy on the internet. And today I'm very excited to bring you a conversation with David Greenstein of Sound.xyz. David shares why he created Sound and how the project has evolved over time, specifically how it provides value to both musical artists and their fans, really get into the core value proposition of NFTs as he sees it. We talk about David's choice to build Sound as a protocol and the value that interoperability and permissionless building bring to the larger Sound brand. That's a conversation about strategy and how to think about value creation in these ecosystems. We get to hear about the mobile app that Sound is building and either has just released or will soon release. And we cover topics like incentive alignment, the value of curation, digital identity and music collection, the ways AI could impact the music industry, and the distribution of value in the music industry at large. David's obviously a deep thinker and pragmatic builder at the intersection of crypto and music. So I think you'll find this conversation fascinating. Let's get into it. David, welcome to the pod.
Thank you for having me. A long time coming.
Long time coming. Yeah, I remember back in the glory days of pre-bull market, I believe we met for the first time in Miami amongst the palm trees and the fancy cars and the wildness of, I think, Art Basel at the time. It was my first Art Basel, but it's been cool just to sort of see where you've gone, where we've gone, and to come back together and sort of touch base, catch up. I think it's going to be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I always like to get started, especially given what we're on today with. Long before that, I was perusing the Seed Club Discord in its early days, and it was actually there before I started working on Sound that I met Jeremy Lloyd, who's one of the members of Marion Hill. I was like so shocked that he was in a Seed Club Discord because I was like, this is very weird to me. Like maybe it's a fake account. And this was when I was and still do, hitting up everything and anything that would talk to me and just looking for feedback. And that was kind of back in March of 2021. And, I started just bouncing ideas off of Jeremy. This was like ideas that I never ended up working on, but somebody that's a very close friend of mine in Sound and, got started in the Seed Club Discord. So I think you've played a role, whether you like it or not, in just kind of some of the early ideation of Sound.
No, I'm very happy. And also full disclosure, I think we're investors in Sound, myself personally. And so important to say that. But I feel like this entire wave of exploration of how media comes on chain, what type of new collector behaviors, how new revenue can be created. There's like a whole bunch of really interesting threads here that Sound is sort of right in the middle of. And so I'm hoping through this conversation, we can sort of dive into your brain as somebody who's a large optimist and also a very big pragmatist at the same time. Your hard-earned, tough decisions or insights that have come from those decisions, I think will be super valuable to anybody listening here today. But to start off the conversation, give us a brief intro on what Sound is, but then also why was Sound the thing you chose to work on?
Yeah. So Sound is a set of Web3 tools for artists to monetize and experiment with their music in new ways. And really, we just make it fun and social to put out music and create new ways for listeners to basically collect and directly support that music. I think part of the backstory on Sound is today music has never been more passive. And I always start off by saying, there's two problems in music and two problems only. And they have nothing to do with Web3, which is one, how do you help artists reach people with their music? And I call that music discovery. And two, how do you help artists make money on their music? And how do we, monetize music? And I think today the tools to create music had never been better. You're literally seeing the cost of music, AI is obviously a very timely topic, but like it's really coming down to near zero. But the tools to discover music have never been more expensive. And today in music, we have a lack of tools to discover music. We had TikTok, we used to have SoundCloud. And I think, there's so much room for basically making it fun to support music and in a way that wasn't there beforehand. And, TikTok has largely moved music to the background where you watch these videos and it's truly a video platform, not a music platform. And so you've kind of cheapened the connection between an artist and a listener because now they're watching this video, they hear the song, it's in the background, but they don't really know about the artist involved. And that same thing is true with Spotify and playlists where you listen to these playlists and you have no idea who the artist is. And definitely you're not forming the same emotional connection that you used to when you purchase an iTunes or CDs or vinyls because you were actually spending money you could only afford to spend 100, iTunes per year, or a couple CDs. And so you really form these deep connections. And I think part of the inspiration behind Sound was how do you basically restore that active connection? How do you build for the people who really are passionate about music and the artists that don't necessarily fit into the algorithms and, have a lot of resources behind them? And how do we just make it fun to basically support music and connect with music in a very active form of way? So that's kind of the inspiration on Sound.
Yeah, I think what I'm most excited about when we think about the why build in Web3 or in crypto or whatever you want to call it is the sense that there's a whole new set of tools that might just lead to new types of user behaviors, new business models, new, more interesting things on the internet. And you're sort of articulating that there's these sort of big and seemingly intractable problems that continue to exist in the digital world around discoverability and connection. It almost feels like we're going further down that path rather than, towards some sort of solution. So I'm curious, like, what is it about the blockchain that really helps to solve some of these issues from your point of view?
Yeah, I think one thing that people fall into the trap of is, trying to build things like existed in the past instead of embracing the future looking nothing like what was there beforehand. And I think, when you look at the last major music shift from iTunes to Spotify looks a whole lot different than iTunes. And so I think the next evolution in music is going to be something that doesn't look exactly like streaming. And I think there are a couple of things that really drew me to building in Web3. The first is building a fast, transparent, accurate global payment system for music. All of those words would never be used to describe the current music system where, you billions of dollars of lost royalties per year that are famously called black box royalties. Money oftentimes moves slowly. You pay for the privilege of, as I said, losing the money. And so really the idea that you could pay an artist instantly is super, super compelling. Globally, one system, you don't need to integrate with different countries. That was one thing that really appealed to building kind of the Web3 rails. And then the second thing was, from a product philosophy, I build things for myself. And that was a lot of the inspiration for Sound was something that I wished existed in the world. And I was that person, that was on SoundCloud that was saying, hey, I found this artist before you. I found Drake, beforehand. And, there's no real way for me to be able to prove that. And I thought it'd be really interesting if you could actually prove in a public accessible way that, hey, I supported this artist or I found this song before somebody else did. And when you're a new company and you're trying to build trust, I think you could obviously rely on Sound to exist forever. But that's a very dangerous value proposition because, we're a startup and it's hard to get to that level. And so building in Web3 kind of allowed us to separate your proof of being able to support this artist from Sound, the company. And obviously that kind of led us to start to explore NFTs. And those two reasons alone were as deep as it got for why we started in Web3. And now I think you're seeing a lot of the interoperability use cases and, all the things that we like. I think part of the beauty is like, you don't actually have to come up with every single idea. Everyone that, can build experiences on top of NFTs, you kind of unlock automatically. So I think those are kind of the trifecta for me.
Yeah, I love how powerful like a very simple reason to build something can be when it sort of gets built in this open playground. And I'm curious to hear from you. It sounds like the expectations were, okay, I can mint music, I can discover music early, I can show provenance of it. Clearly, there's new business models or at least revenue sources for artists here as well. We can mint, open editions or sort of in the meta right now as we speak. I'm curious, like, what were some unexpected user behaviors that emerged from that might have sort of evolved your thinking about the strategy or direction of Sound?
Yeah, there's a couple things that really ring true for me today. One is this tension between reach, sometimes in monetization. And then two is the differences between artists and listeners. So let's talk about the easier one, artists and listeners. Artists oftentimes want to express themselves in a million different ways. I mean, after all, they're artists. And so, you want to give them the most amount of flexibility and tools to basically be able to creatively express their song and their music and their identity. But listeners oftentimes want one place to, discover things, and they like a conformed experience because it's pretty confusing to keep track of 100 different variables. It's pretty confusing to go to 100 different sites. And so you kind of have this tension between, conforming the experience so that listeners have an easy experience to basically find and browse, and then artists who want to have this unlimited set of options to creatively express themselves. And that's something that we've tried to strike a balance with. For example, like an artist can do a drop on their own website using Sound's tech stack and, have all that infinite customizability. And we've integrated with things like Bonfire. And at the same time, the drop can live on Sound so that they don't have to choose between having this central discovery place and then having their own custom site. Because if I'm a hardcore fan of Rio Kragen, it might be a more personal experience to purchase on his website. But if I don't even know who Rio is, then, it's much easier to come towards one place to find out about new music. I think the second one is, Sound famously started with 25 editions at point one. It was fixed. And kind of the experiment there was I wanted to kind of build this community around music, which is something that's still at the core of Sound. And, the 25 arrives. They sold out for, I think, like 350 straight days every single day at 5 o'clock. And it was kind of a game on how to get one. I think naturally artists started to express their creativity, and they were like, I want to do more than 25, and started to kind of expand in size. And some artists wanted to do smaller, some artists wanted to do bigger. And I think one thing about a song, though, is that it's really like its purpose and its existence is to inspire as many people as possible. And it started to feel weird that, 500 people would line up to support this thing, but only 25 people could get it. And yeah, you were basically saying, and that was money that could go to the artist that is just being rejected and blocked off and saying, sorry, no, you can't support the artist. Feels like, intrinsically odd when one of our goals is obviously to help artists, monetize their music in new ways. Instead, they were donating to the Ethereum mining organization because their transaction was getting rejected. And so we started to experiment with open editions, and open editions were super powerful because now you could accept everyone at the floodgates. But what if they weren't there in the first day or week? And that to me was a fundamental problem, and still is, because it's treating music like TikTok videos where you have to get all these mints in this short time period. And what if somebody really likes the song, 20 days later and the open edition is closed? Well, then you're basically, again, shutting them out and saying, hey, sorry, you need to spend a lot more money on the secondary market. And then, we launched something very recently, which is a sound kind of invention called Sound Swap, where it's a fixed price for the first 24 hours. And then the price actually starts to rise as more people buy. So there's an always on mint function. And, we mimicked using, something called a bonding curve. We mimicked the secondary sale as a primary sale. And so it creates this one-click buy and sell experience. It's a step in the right direction in terms of creating this like forever mint strategy. And I think one of the things that I've been wrestling with is like, how do you maximize reach and scarcity at the same time? Kind of two opposing thoughts. But I think there's a lot of really cool experiments yet to be run that can take into account the goal of the song, reaching as many people as possible, and then two, still letting people have their own sense of identity on what resonates most with them. So whether it's being there early or the token IDs and all this fun stuff. So I think that's one major shift, is just the set of tools has greatly expanded from when we started with a very specific thing of like 25 at point one, which was completely made up in and of itself by me and the first artist on Sound, Oshi.
Yeah, interesting. So obviously you're sort of playing into this new evolving type of consumer behavior, this on-chain media versus off-chain, this idea of like collecting being like the evolution of, or maybe analogous to the like in some way. And you're just sort of having to steward an engineering organization towards building the things that are going to create opportunity for your organization in the future. And I'm curious how you look at the strategy of building Sound as a platform or a protocol or a business. I don't know what the right sort of layer of abstraction to tackle that is, but I'm really trying to understand the view that you as a founder and as an organization have on how you go build things that actually create both enterprise value, but also create these new types of behaviors that would drive that value.
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, we always build for artists and collectors first. I think, the core beginning of Sound was me talking to every artist that ended up joining Sound and really asking them and showing them the initial designs and getting feedback. And really, that's how I was pretty confident that the early version of Sound would work, was just, I put the original product in front of them and said, tell me what you like and don't like, and we'll make some changes and adjust accordingly. And then on the collector side, I think I'm privy to being in a lot of collector chats and responding, and everyone knows that I'm around 24/7. So being obsessive and dogmatic with talking to users, I think is like one thing that I think is really, really critical. I think one of the things that, I always have the assumption of is, I could be wrong. And so we have this mantra at Sound of just like ship as much as quickly as possible so that we can learn. And we're constantly shipping every day to prod and pushing out new features. And I think, when I originally started Sound, I said, we're going to build it in 3 months. Now, I had no idea at the time of how we were going to build it in 3 months, but it was just put out there into the world, and somehow we were only 2 weeks late, but we did it in 3 months and 2 weeks. And so that kind of served as like foundation for everything else we build. Nothing in Sound takes more than 3 months. That's like the maximum timeline. And many things we're talking about weeks. And I think one of the things that makes it a privilege to work with the Sound team is that we're obsessive about every day and hour that we can save. And so we're constantly shipping. I think in terms of like how we prioritize things, I think it's really about understanding, like, does this drive value for artists? Does this help them get their music out to as many people as possible? And does this help them make more money on their music? I think those are the two things that we constantly come back to. I think the name of a startup is there's a million things to work on that we can work on. And it's really the job of myself to say no to almost everything besides the three most important things. And I think that's one thing is we say no to most things that we work on. So it's really around choosing the three that deliver the most value for artists and collectors. And unfortunately, we reject a lot of really fun things that we would love to work on. So it's been a struggle because we'd love to build everything and we will build everything, but it's really the sequencing of things that I think we spend a lot of time talking about.
Because I'm curious, like, so beyond sort of the mechanics that you've rolled out, and I see a constant sort of evolution in those mechanics, and I think that's pretty clear as you've just sort of described, like getting those things right in a way that really hits with the market can really create a ton of value. But you also launched Sound as a protocol. And so to me, there's sort of like a strategy there where maybe there's like a longer term play as far as making sound like the medium with which music is brought on chain, even if that maybe weakens like the monetization opportunity for Sound, the entity. And I'm wondering what about the trade-offs you there.
So the way we kind of rolled out Sound was I truly believe in dog fooding your own product first before you ever ask somebody to use or build on top of it. And so we built Sound.xyz, the website, on top of the Sound protocol to make sure that, we're actually using the tools that we want others to build on top of. And now it's kind of been our approach since the beginning was to really build the best consumer experience for music and, leverage the artists that were on Sound to start to bring music on chain. I think one of the things that we're not particular about is, people doing drops on their own website or people building on top of Sound. And in fact, I think that is literally the value prop of Web3 is the interoperability and the permissionless ability for people to remix and do things on their own. And so one of the things that's been really exciting is everyone should have access to the same smart contracts that we use on Sound to basically deploy their own music NFTs. And we've seen people, like Bonfire build upload tools on top of Sound where anyone can deploy their own, music NFT or even remix it in ways that we didn't even think possible, like for podcasts, which is something that we can, get into. And yeah, I think and then, we're integrated with all the streaming players on top of Web3, like Spinamp and Feature Tape and Ooh And so really you create this ecosystem where people can use and build on top of the product in a way that ultimately monetizes the artists in a way that they didn't even think before possible. So I think the main thing is the reason why you want to encourage permissionless building and reach is that's how you help artists reach as many people as possible and you help artists make money, as much money as possible. And I think a lot about how music works today where, Spotify's API and everything, you have to get access. It's limited to what you can do. They're obviously gating the full consumer experience. And so I think to me, I am much more excited about what isn't possible today than what is possible today. And, I think that is going to be a robust set of music ecosystem. And I think you see this a lot in the space where there's so much collaboration. We just worked with Arpeggi so that they could create remixes on their site and then mint them on Sound for the full complete song. We work a lot with Heads, which is like an audiovisual collective for doing curated mixtapes. I talked about Bonfire, talked about the streaming players. So there's just a pretty robust ecosystem out there. We've Mirror with, doing music blogs and embedding music NFTs in it. There's just a really cool set of tools. And, if we tried to build that all ourselves, it would take us a little bit of time. And I think that's part of the beauty is building these interchangeable modular pieces of code that all can interact with each other on chain and value can flow permissionlessly and, all those fun things. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of it.
Totally makes sense. I think the season we are in right now in technology and startups generally, I'm going to refer to as it's time for revenue season. The idea of how do we actually sustain these? Where's the real, rubber meets the road thing where money is changing hands here? And I think so much of us building in Web3, there's new and exciting views on how that might happen. Of course, we see many great examples of this in L1s, et cetera. So I'm curious how you think about building value at the Sound organization level, because I can see building tools that help artists make a ton of money. Naturally, there will be revenue or value created there in this ecosystem. I'm curious if you have an insight on how or where that shows up.
Yeah, so I'm really passionate about incentive alignment. And I think where most things go wrong is when the incentives aren't aligned. And you could basically have everyone become a good actor when you would structure the incentives properly. So to give an example, one of the reasons why I built in Web3 is because, the fast, transparent, accurate. Everything is transparent. Everything is, accurate. And so there is no room for saying, somebody was supposed to get paid $10 but only got paid $5 because all of it is public and on chain. And so the way I view it is for anything that, shows up on Sound and, comes through the Sound. That's where it makes sense for Sound to take a percentage. And, today we take 5% of primary sales. And then for things that don't show up on Sound and just want to use the contracts, those are completely free. And so at the base level, there are no fees with the contracts. And that way, there's no incentive to necessarily like fork things, or people can use them on their own. And so I think, again, like if Sound took 5% just for the contracts and then didn't help with any discovery or distribution, that would seem to be a little bit unfair. And so to me, I don't actually think people, maybe a little like more controversial, I don't think anyone has a problem with capturing value if you deliver value. I think people only have a problem when you take value and you don't actually deliver any. And that's honestly like a huge part of, even the music industry today, where some people take or own masters or take, 80%, but are they delivering 80% value? If they are, then there might not be any discrepancy. But most of the time that people feel slighted is because they're over-promising, under-delivering instead of under-promise, over-deliver. And I think ultimately that's where we want to set up to be on the latter, not the former.
So my take on it is that distributing a protocol or a set of smart contracts that allows anybody to go build is ultimately building the most valuable thing in crypto for any project. Is sort of like have their brand be synonymous with a category. Right. So the digital gold is Bitcoin. There's a big battle over open editions. Is it Zora? Is it Manifold? The L2 wars. My belief is that you see a way through building these tools and proliferating these tools aggressively and fast in a way that creates a ton of value for artists, and that Sound gets to be seen as like the music tool in blockchain, the music platform, the music protocol. And if you're able to do that, then should there be a token in the future, or should there be, an ecosystem or an app store? All these other opportunities become possible. But absent of being able to do that, you're sort of relegated to maybe a ability to take fees purely on your website. Is that sort of a fair assumption here, or where would you push back on that?
Yeah, I think we have to earn the right to get there. I mean, I think the goal is for Sound to be the home place for music on chain. But I think in order to do that, I think, we have to build the best experience for both artists and listeners to basically want to, upload and support music. And so I never want to count my chickens before they hatch. And I think one of the next milestones for Sound is really getting Sound open to the public, which has been something we've been working for over a year now. And we started Sound Curated because we really we're maniacal about every detail of Sound, both on the contract level all the way up to the UI. And, one of the challenges has been figuring out a way that we can handle the volume of uploads. We can handle the copyright infringement that will inevitably happen when you open up Sound. What is our policy? What is our process? And also, how do we find a set of ears for every song so that things don't just get buried and lost? And that was like a large reason why we haven't been open, is we wanted to give every song a chance to actually being discovered versus, if too many things get uploaded at once, it's just ultimately going to get lost to the abyss. And so we've taken every detail of Sound has been, carefully thought out. I think we often update our positions and, change our minds, but we're pretty obsessive with trying to do just the maximum good for artists and collectors. And then ultimately, if you provide a lot of value to artists and collectors, you'll be able to capture value yourself. I think one of the things we felt really strongly about is not capturing value ourselves before we delivered value to artists. And that was actually present in the initial implementation of Sound, where we didn't monetize Sound, even though we were aggressively paying artists, until we felt like we had something that was artists would be yes, we're more than happy to let you monetize so that, you guys can exist. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of the gist of it, is we want to get to where you said, but it's a long road to get there.
Yeah. One of the pieces you shared in there, this idea of a listener or a collector for every song. I'm curious how you approach that, because another challenge in music is that there's probably is more supply than there is demand. And do you worry that is going to get in the way of that sort of magical experience for artists when they join Sound?
Yeah, so I actually think this is where the collectors, this is their main function and their main role. Is today in music, it's very centralized in terms of who actually has the ability to put on a new artist on streaming platforms. And a lot of the biggest traffic drivers on streaming services today are either algorithms like Discover Weekly or Radio, or, playlists that are owned and operated by streaming services. The problem is that playlists owned and operated by streaming services are run by humans who tend to have two ears, and there's only so much music that can be put out. And today, I think the most exciting and the thing that I'm more fired up than anything is about empowering users and listeners and collectors to become tastemakers themselves. You've already started to see this with people on Sound that are starting their own collectives or their own collecting groups. the ones like loaners, there's heads, there's individual collectors like Critty, and there's organizations like Coop Records. And so there's a lot of like really, really cool things where I think the users are going to become the tastemakers instead of sound itself. And I think that's one thing that I'm like pretty cautious about is like, obviously like I'm super passionate about sound, the brand, but I think it would be a mistake and not even the intention if sound is bigger than the artists and the users on the platform. And that to me is like sound is a set of tools at the end of the day. I view it more as a set of tools than a platform. I actually want the users and the listeners to take, because, I believe in wisdom of the crowds. I believe there's too much music out there. The only way that we're going to sort through it and find the right set of ears is if every listener and user is empowered to become a tastemaker themselves and create playlists and collect and, be seen as something that can drive traffic towards artists. So I think it's less about having one giant, massive organization that controls who gets played and who doesn't get played or who gets collected and doesn't get collected, and much more about empowering individual listeners and collectors to basically create their own brands and organizations.
I'm curious how you see incentive alignment existing at that level there. So are we going to see like record labels emerge just in this Web3 context, or are there maybe different ways that individuals are going to be participating in the curation and also the value flow of that curation?
Yeah, I don't know if the right term is record labels, but I definitely think you're going to see music curators, which have long existed in music and, historically have captured little value unless you were basically a record label. And so this creates a way for like kind of the blog era to come back and, for people to basically be able to make money curating music. I mean, historically, music, again, poor incentive alignment. Music blogs made money from advertising, not by curating music. Advertising has nothing to do with curating music. And so, on Sound, we have a feature where you can share a link to a song and earn 5% just because somebody collected the music through your playlist or through your link. Again, that is an early example of its structuring incentives, aligned so that artists and, listeners are empowered to share music, and basically just be able to earn money by sharing music is something that like has never really been done before, which is something that I'm really excited about in this initial iteration for just encouraging people to become. I think a lot of kids in their bedroom could become curators, didn't even know it's possible to earn money by listening to music, would do it for free, and they already do it for free. And I think that's something that I think is really, really excited. So we launched a leaderboard literally this week for the top people curating music on Sound. And I think what you're going to see is like if somebody's really good at driving sales for songs, somebody's going to hit them up and say, hey, can you help me out on my next release? And to me, that's a great example of like, instead of somebody hitting up Sound asking, can you help us promote your release? They're now hitting up an individual or an organization on the internet and saying, can you help me promote my release? Which is, again, like a little bit of democratizing the distribution process of getting ears on songs.
Yeah, and I think you can also start to see how that layer gets embedded in other media type platforms. So I think it's really interesting to watch the Invest in Music publication on Mirror and the growing audience there and the natural sort of value flow that happens when you get introduced to new music. And there's also a potential to purchase on the end there. And we can route this cap or the fees sort of directly, transparently, immediately.
And that's kind of like how you structure the value incentives correctly. Like, for example, like Invest in Music can build their own brand, their own website, their own blog, and you can mint directly on their blog without necessarily even, leaving to go to Sound, right? So from a user perspective, you're just fully immersed, but it's still benefiting both the artist, the Invest in Music, and the Sound ecosystem more broadly. And so I think that's like a fundamental, shift in thought to how things, used to work, where you have to drive towards this one place. They capture all the value. So to give it a real example, like you have these music blogs that used to have SoundCloud embeds. They drive all the traffic to SoundCloud, which obviously helps SoundCloud's numbers. And the music curator that's obviously driving traffic to SoundCloud basically captures nothing. There's no point of monetization for them. And then advertising is their way of revenue. And when that disappears, the music blog disappears. And that's why we have no music blogs anymore, except for, a couple that have weathered.
The parties get less interesting too, because I mean, it truly is this sort of social capital that has been almost eroded, or the value of that social capital has been eroded in the modern internet.
And I think people heavily underestimate word of mouth. That's like the number one way I will check out a song. My friend that I trust says, yo, this is like a song I think you'll like. And it's somebody that I obviously respect their taste. I'm listening immediately. It's more powerful than any other, algorithm or anything that's going to be put in front of me. And so to me, I think that's part of the beauty of the internet, is bringing back the social capital of being able to support and follow people and see what they're listening to. And I'm really excited for like social recommendations and just leaning into that, because I think it's something that's missing from music on the internet today.
So I very rarely listen to music on my desktop unless and if I do, it's like I'm going deep in work and, we get some house music or something going on. But like most of my music exploration and enjoyment is done when I'm out for a walk or if I'm driving somewhere or I'm at the airport. So this mobile experience, like Spotify on my phone is the most used place that I listen to music. And I know that you guys have been working on a mobile app for a while now. I'm curious if you can sort of walk us through your thinking there and maybe give us a bit of an early look. Hopefully this will come up before you actually launch it, but give us an early look into what we should expect from a mobile app from Sound.
Yeah, so we chose to work on a mobile app about a couple months ago, again, less than 3, because that's the rule. And I actually started working on it earlier than I thought I would, mainly because I got the chance to work with somebody that I've been wanting to work with for a long, long time, who had built a series of music apps beforehand. And I was just really excited about collaborating with him. And, we went pretty deep for a V1 of an initial mobile app. And so we wanted to make it basically fully functional with the core Sound website, with the exception of one major thing, which is we're not supporting minting to start due to, Apple's App Store policies and just simplifying things and making it a little bit easier to get off the ground. So it's a pure listening app. And I think the thing does two things. One is that it's by far the easiest and simplest way to listen to music on Sound, given that you can take it on the go, given that you can browse all the music really easily. And then two is that it's a great way to show off your music collection, which I think is part of the fun of just supporting Sound, is seeing your avatar on the song page, seeing your wallet and being able to listen to things in your wallet in a more coherent manner, being able to make playlists on the go and seeing which ones you own. And so really, I think it solves two problems to start. One is the ability to just listen to all the music that's on Sound and really discover things that maybe you didn't even know that were available. And then two, really the best way to show off and brag about your collection. And I think just seeing people's comments show up on the song page is really, 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 really exciting, because I think it just makes it fun. It's almost like watching music instead of listening to music, just making it fun to see who's supporting it. It creates this rabbit hole behavior where you can be on a song, you can see somebody's avatar, you can click it, you can then go see what they're listening or what other things they've collected, what other playlists they're making. And it creates this social music discovery experience instead of today, music often feels like a dead end. You get to a song page, that's it, you're there. There's no entry points or jump off points to other people's profiles. And again, I think it's really just creating this joint ecosystem between artists and listeners that help reinforce each other. And I think that's something that I'm really excited about, is the music discovery and then also the collector discovery as well.
So I think it's super interesting to think of Ethereum as the operating system and these mobile apps as the interface to that, and sort of in a completely unbounded world that is Ethereum, it can be very hard to understand context or to make ways to discover things. And then if we all of a sudden just put here a little box and a lens that we can look at things through, all of a sudden a lot of more meaning can be made there. And so I'm curious, what are the new types of actions that you hope people will actually engage in through a mobile app?
Yeah, so I think one thing is just the diversity of songs that people are actually listening to is one. Obviously, creating playlists. I think playlists are in the early stages of what can be done with them. We obviously launched a feature about referrals where you can share links and earn money just by making playlists. I think there's a lot more that can get done in terms of how do you make it really, really fun to curate music. That's actually some of the core users that we're designing for are people that really love crate digging, really love to show off and serve as tastemakers. And how do you kind of empower them? And also, how do you signal to users who's really good at tastemaking? And how do you make it a social, fun experience? So I think those are kind of the two main things. Is I think we have this general belief in the flywheel that people will listen to things, then add it to their playlist and kind of serve that as a wish list almost. And then ultimately at the end of the funnel that they'll end up collecting it. And I think the more time that people listen to the song, which is why the core principle of Sound in the beginning was anyone can listen for free, but collecting is valuable to own, it still rings true. And so we think that listening is the gateway to collecting, and otherwise why else are they collecting in the first place? And listening makes you want to have that deeper connection with that song versus it used to be the other way around. And so ultimately, the more people listen to these songs, the more they're going to want to connect directly with that song and with that artist. And I think music is the entry point into the artist world. And that's why ultimately people typically fall in love with an artist when they first hear their song. And the song is the starting point of everything, which is why Sound started with individual songs and music. And, I think there's so much room. And you start to notice that these songs are basically building an artist's fan club almost essentially around their music. You see these in this group chats and it forms the community around the music. And I think one of the things I've been thinking about is songs are almost like if I had to draw an analogy to the PFP world, I would say like songs are like almost like rarities in the sense that like me and you both might like the same artist, but we have totally, and we could have debates and fights about this in terms of like what's our favorite song. And I think that's like part of the beauty of like we all love the same artist, but we have different tastes in songs and music. And I think, it's just different ways to creatively express itself. And that's why music is identity at the end of the day. It's things that we gravitate to that show off our personality. And I think, that's the beauty of it.
Music as a PFP. I like that. So, okay, like if I could wave a magic wand and I could give you two things that would make sound super successful, it would probably be like the music catalog that, say, Apple Music or Spotify has, and the embedded user base that, say, Spotify has, right? So millions of people subscribe every month, and then you also have every song that could possibly be out there. So I'm curious, like if you had those two assets and you were still very committed to building in Web3 and saw the opportunity to use on-chain tools to make those platforms better, what would you do with them?
I think the first thing is what I kind of talked about already, which is like, I really believe in empowering the user base. I think that's the key to on-chain music discovery, is really making sure that listeners can be their own brands. I think if you use some of the main music products today, and, let's just use Spotify and Apple as an example, and you go on the homepage and you scroll, you won't find one user-generated playlist on any of it. It's entirely their branded assets. Now, there's plenty of reasons why that might be a good or bad idea, but I think the main thing is that's actually something that I want to lean into, because I think there's a big opportunity that's being missed today. And so I would love to create individual brands and value around people creating user-generated playlists, because I think user-generated playlists can be as powerful, if not more powerful, than playlists created by, the platform or Sound. And the reason why is like, I think Sound is an organization run by humans, and so we can only create so many playlists. And I think that is the key to helping the other side, which is the millions of artists, is by creating millions of tastemakers instead of one or two or three or four. And so to me, that is the biggest thing that I would do, is really build those. And that's something that we think about a lot, is like, how do we build tools for those users so that they can help us with the discovery problem instead of us having to do all the discovery ourselves.
Yeah, interesting. So where does AI come into all of this? I mean, it seems like the question we have to ask for anybody that's building at the edges of anything right now. Do you see it as like a big opportunity for sound, for artists in general?
Yeah, I think music, so this is a classic example where music industry is like one of the most aggressive to try out a new technology. Then you follow this typical pattern where, labels shut it down and kind of set it back a little bit. And then ultimately, like, the music industry typically comes back with some agreement to work it out. I think one thing I don't have an opinion on is like, you're not going to stop innovation. So if the internet wants it to happen, it's going to happen. Now it just becomes like, how do you harness it for good instead of something that's not good? I think what I'm excited about is I'm excited for artists to basically extend their brands, which are super powerful, and their music in ways that were never before possible, and monetize those accordingly. Because, as part of Sound, like, we think music is heavily undervalued. And the thing I'm most excited about is, for on the listener side or creator side, is like, one of the things that TikTok kind of showed was like, it turns everyone into a creator, even if they didn't even think that they were. And so I'm really excited for people to create music in a way that they weren't able to beforehand. And so I think that to me is like the positive. And I always like to look at things from a positive angle. I think what's important though is that the artist gets compensated, the artist has control. And that's where I think Web3 Rails could be really, really powerful. For example, an artist could say, hey, if you don't use this public contract to upload your music, I'm going to take it down, right? And that means that the artist has visibility into what's being used. They can, take it down. They're getting paid royalties. Because I think one of the things that I think would be completely ethical to the goals at hand is somebody training a model on an artist's voice and then monetizing it, and that original artist who they trained the model on the voice of not being compensated for it. So I think I'm more excited about how it amplifies. I don't think anything is here to replace. I think one of the things that I'm skeptical of is like, I think part of the reason why I like a song is because of the emotional connection and the story to it. And I think it is, maybe I'm a little slow, but I think I'm curious to see how the storytelling gets replaced. And if people are willing to separate and say, hey, I actually don't care about that, because historically that's the reason, like, part of the reason you love these artists and these songs is you feel like you're connected to their life and they're speaking about things that everyone's related to in the experiences. And so to me, I think that's the one missing thing. But I'm more just curious to learn. I think anything that's new and exciting, I think is ultimately something to embrace, and pair with the right incentive alignment, you can actually get really, really cool results. So I'm more, I'm an optimist on this one, and yeah, just excited to, I think we have our first AI, we have a couple AI generated songs that are dropping on Sound today or this week. And, something that I've been really, really excited about.
Yeah, I think I tweeted that AI content proliferation will make real human creation more valuable, not less. And I think it's this insight as well that it's not purely the sound that makes something valuable. It's the context that it emerges. It's the relationships that it sparks. It's the fact that we can talk. So AI songs might be very popular right now because it's new and novel and it's in the zeitgeist. But does that sustain in the same way that a Fred Again Boiler Room set that people just watch and go like, that was unhinged, and we're all talking about it for a day or two or whatever, and it sort of bonds people together, and it feels very bland for that to just purely be algorithmic driven.
Yeah. And again, I think people look at it as always like a replace mechanism in terms of will it replace music that we listen to today? And I think that's the wrong way to look at it. The way I look at it is more, what can we make today with, humans and obviously AI that we couldn't make beforehand? And is that something that's really, really exciting? And so to me, I think the main thing is to focus on what's never been before possible instead of trying to just do what's already existing and do it in the same but different way. So I think it's more about the new possibilities than just rearranging the old ones.
It's going to be an interesting few months and years, as the last few months and years have also been interesting. These are the interesting times that people have suggested that we should live in.
I think people are always, we're human. So I think one thing I've noticed is people love the sensationalism of the highs and the lows. And so one of the things is it wasn't too long ago, probably 5-6 years ago, where AI was going through another trend. And it was probably the hottest thing in tech as well. And then ultimately went through, I guess, a bit of a bear market, and now it's reemerged from that. I think it's something that I keep in the back of my mind when it comes to obviously Web3 is we've seen multiple bulls and bears, and right now we're in more of a bear market. But I think the one thing that I think is super important is it's important to have conviction, because I'm sure there's a ton of people that were told don't work on AI over the last couple of years that were super passionate. And that's something about sound is why do I work on music? It's because music's been my passion. So as a kid, it could be bear market, bull market, but all I do is think about music. And I think ultimately that conviction is something that I hope pays off in the long run. And I oftentimes see people that are building things that they're not actually passionate about, and then the bear market comes, they jump ship to something else. And so I think I always caution when you're starting a company or you're starting anything, have conviction in what you're doing, because there's going to be a million people. There's going to be many times where it looks like the dumbest idea of all time. And I think while right now it looks like AI just came out of nowhere, I specifically remember probably about 6-7 years ago it being the same excitement that isn't there now. And
yeah, I think that's super well said. And for folks who are applying to the next C Club batch, I think that's some of the core advice. And I think what I'm excited to see emerge more as I think a lot of tourist builders have gone to easier pastures. Building sound today, building in Web3 today, building especially on the consumer side of it is much more challenging. It's not the place you go for easy money, but if you have deep conviction, I think there'd be a lot of value to be created there. And so I'm excited to be on the journey with you, David, and to have a chance to speak with you today about just the variety of ways you see the world and the way that sound is going to build for hopefully a more fair, it just seems like there's so much more vibrancy that's possible if the business models enable many more people to participate in the ecosystem than just solely the network and the end user. And to me, that's where the shining light is here. Where's that nuance and that emergent type of behavior that might just allow a lot more people to participate in these digital ecosystems?
Yeah. So I think one thing that's important is that it's a music economy. And I know we always talk about artists, and artists are, our shining light, because without them, they create the music. That's where it all starts, with the music. So, artists deserve to come first. But I think one thing that I always remind people of is nobody gets to the top alone. And I think today, the music ecosystem is not, again, incentive aligned. So you have all these fans that promote an artist. No artist, becomes a big artist without their fans. And that's why you oftentimes hear artists thanking their fans and saying, I wouldn't be here without you. But today, fans, they capture basically none of the value that obviously gets accrued when an artist obviously ends up becoming this larger entity. And it's not just listeners. It's also the music curators, the blogs, the labels, the songwriters, the producers. And there's actually a whole set of participants in kind of the music economy, and they all carry different roles and responsibilities and value propositions. And I think the main thing that sometimes people get wrong is they think the pie is fixed and, we're all scrapping over the same, fixed pie, instead of thinking about how do we expand the pie so that everyone can kind of capture value and obviously create sustainable livings off just music. And so I think about it as like, okay, obviously, how do we first and foremost get artists paid? But then how do we, get listeners rewarded for discovering music early? How do we help music curators and music blogs create a living? How do we help labels make a living for taking the risk on artists? And, I think a lot of the sometimes forgotten heroes in the music industry are the producers and the songwriters who are behind the scenes actually making the music itself at the end of the day. And I think that's something that to me really, really, really excites me about sound, is just creating this vibrant ecosystem for all parties and participants and not focusing on any one or two. So I can be found on Twitter primarily with my Napster logo at dgreenstein1, and then also obviously at the Sound.xyz Twitter account. I think I still run that account to this day by myself. So basically DMing me on two different places. I think in terms of what's next, I think obviously I talked about the mobile app. I think the second thing is obviously opening up sound. And then three is, I think obviously this week has been extremely painful with obviously gas fees. We recently launched the ability to sign in with an email. We added the ability to purchase with a credit card. And I think the final thing to kind of build this seamless UX, or at least have a V1 of it, is to remove the generous donation to the Ethereum mining organization every time you do anything on Sound. And I think we are, evaluating several scalable solutions that I think will kind of give us a shot of really bringing the seamless user experience for music. So I think all of those three are the three kind of major milestones over the upcoming months. And then, we're always shipping like a little bit of fun social features along the way that just make it more fun and creative to express yourself with music. So
awesome. So if you're a collector or user, check out the mobile app. If you're an artist and you've been waiting to get on Sound, it's your time really soon. And if you're a builder, watching how you guys move to an L2 and the types of user experiences that can be created there, I think it can be full of insights for others that are building in your footsteps. So thanks, Ben. Appreciate the time and looking forward to seeing what you guys put out over the next little while.
Thank you for having me, Jess, and congrats on all the recent C Club announcements, and can't wait to see what you guys do with the consumer cohort.
Thanks, Ben.
Hello, friends. Steph here, Media Team Steward at C Club. If you like this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review Building at the Edges. This helps other Web3 builders discover these valuable insights. And tell us what you think on Twitter. Tag us at @CClubHQ. Thanks for listening. See you on the internet.